Welcome to another episode of Digging Deeper. My name is Pastor Bradley Martin. Excited that you've joined with us for another look at some study in the Bible. If you've been with us in the past, we have looked at several different studies. We're going to be starting a new study today on the book of Exodus. So I'm very excited that we have the opportunity to start that today. If you want to go back and look at any of our previous episodes, you can find those on our churches at One Church, our YouTube or our Facebook pages. You can also find us if you want to listen to the audio versions of any of these. You can find those on your favorite podcasting streaming services. Again, please share the word, do all those kinds of social media things so that we can get the word out to those that we are doing these kind of studies. Like I said, we are going to start a new study today on the book of Exodus, do a little introduction to the book of Exodus, plus dive into chapter 1. So that being said, let's get going on that. Just to give you a little bit of an overview, Exodus is a part of what is referred to as the Pentateuch or the Torah. The Pentateuch being the first 5 books of the Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The Torah, meaning the law, they're all written by Moses. Most, if not all, people would agree that Moses was the author of those books. Moses is the central character once we get into Exodus chapter 2, and we'll be introduced to him in chapter 2, which we'll look at next week. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy all focus on God's covenant with his people. Genesis is a long account. There's many things in there, but the overall arching thing is God's creation. God's people become his chosen people through Abraham, which we'll look at here in just a little bit. And so we're in the book of Exodus. Exodus is taken from the Greek Septuagint, meaning an exit or leaving out of. We'll explain that here in just a second as we kind of dive into chapter 1. 2 really major themes of Exodus. You have God's covenant with his people, which I'll read here in a second in Genesis 13, as well as a foreshadowing or foretelling of Christ. And you'll see that as they are leaving Exodus a little bit later in the book. We'll see how it points toward Christ. Moses is also seen as a Christ figure. He is the mediator between God and his people. He becomes the leader of the people that lead them out of Egypt. And if you have no idea what's going on here, you say, well, how'd they get to Egypt? I'll explain that here momentarily. But Moses is seen as a Christ-like figure. He's not Christ, was not the Son of God, but he was the mediator between Israel and God. So you do have that. And we kind of don't want to jump ahead of myself too much. But so how did we get here? How did the nation of Israel get here? Now, this being the time where there's a lot going on with Israel in the news. You may have heard that. There's always volatile situations in the Middle East. Most, if not all, of those center around Israel. Israel is God's chosen people, the birthplace of Judaism. We are a nation that is Judeo-Christian, meaning that we are founded upon the principles of the Jewish and the Christian cultures. We are, as Christians, our faith is based upon Jewish history and Jewish principles. The Old Testament points to Christ, and so we believe that it is a it is a story where God's covenant with the Jewish people was fulfilled with Jesus. Jesus was the Messiah that came. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, he came. Genesis through Malachi point that Jesus is coming. And so you have, it's very important for us not to overlook the Old Testament, especially the history that brings us, because that is our history, our faith. Jesus was born in Israel. He was a Jew. And so it's very important for us to understand this. Now, Genesis 15, let me just read that. When God created creation, of course, we've talked about this in previous podcasts, that that God created a perfect place, the Garden of Eden, where he could commune, he could fellowship, he would be one with his people, his creation, Adam and Eve. The only stipulation that Adam and Eve had placed upon them is that they were not to partake of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Once they did that, they would die. And we have Satan that came upon the scene. They partook of the fruit. They were banished from the garden. From Genesis 1 all the way to Genesis 13-ish, you have this constant going back and forth between good and evil. You have Noah that was righteous in God's sight. God destroyed the earth through the flood except for Noah's family. Once Noah's family emerged and started to repopulate the earth, you still had this good and evil. You had God appeared to Abram, who would later change his name to Abraham, and God called Abram to be the father of a great nation. So he has this covenant or this promise between himself and Abram. And I'm going to read a little bit of chapter 15 in the book of Genesis. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. But Abram said, O Lord, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, Behold, you have given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, This man shall not be your heir, your very own son shall be your heir. And he brought him outside and said, Look toward the heaven and number the stars, if you are able to count to number them. Then he said, So shall your offspring be. And he believed the Lord, and he counted him to him as righteousness. And he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out from Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess. But he said, O Lord, how am I to know that I shall possess it? And he said to him, Bring me a heifer 3 years, a female goat 3 years old, and a ram 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he brought all of them, cut them in half, and laid each half over against each other. But he did not cut the birds in half. And when the birds of prey came down on the carcasses, Abram drove them away. As the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram, and behold, a dreadful and great darkness fell upon him. Then the Lord said, Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. And I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterwards they shall come with great possessions. As for you, you shall go to your father in peace, to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age, and they shall come back here in the fourth generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. When the sun had gone down and it was dark, behold, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, "To your offspring I will give this land from the river of Egypt to the great river of the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Kadamites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites." So you had all these ites that were possessing the land that eventually was going to be Israel. So God made a covenant. He made a promise with Abraham that this land that he was in, a great nation was going to be formed from his offspring. The problem was that Abram was 90 years old at the time, and his wife was 80. And by the time that he had a child, Abram was 100, Sarah was 90. And so, of course, another teaching there for a sermon is the goodness of God, how He's not bound by man's the things that bind us, age, health. God can do all because He's in control of all. So you have this covenant with Abram that God had, and he told them, he said, the people are going to go, they're going to sojourn, they're going to travel to a foreign land, they're going to Egypt, which we know now. They're going to be there for 400 years, and then they're going to come back to this land when it's the right time. So God promised that the land that Abram was in, these people were going to possess. Abram was not going to see that fruition totally from an earthly side. He was going to be with his fathers with God. So it says that Abraham believed him. So from Abraham, just a quick synopsis, and I'm doing this because it's very important to understand where the history came from before you get to Exodus. Abraham had a son, Isaac, in his old age. Isaac gave birth to Jacob and to Esau. Jacob would eventually be his name changed to Israel. Jacob had 12 sons. The favorite of the sons was Joseph. Joseph, being the favorite, kind of played up to that. His brothers became very weary of that, very tired of that, and very angry at that. And so many of those conspired to kill him or do him harm. They eventually sold him to people that took him away. His father thought he was dead. His father mourned for him. And so you have the whole last half of Genesis that focuses on this part about how the people got down to Exodus. And again, this is very important to know as we enter into the book of Exodus. So eventually there was a great famine. Joseph became second in command only to Pharaoh. Joseph was put in prison for many years prior to that because of being falsely accused by Potiphar's wife. Was put into prison. There was a baker. There was a wine taster. There was stories of dreams told. This is a great long episodic thing here. That is not the main gist of what we're talking about. So I'm kind of skimming over that for right now so that we can get to the first chapter of Exodus. But the whole entire nation ended up in Egypt because, like I said, the famine was there. And so Joseph had this great plan that the Pharaoh liked to prepare for the famine. And when the famine happened, all of the people in the world at the time basically came to Egypt to get food. There was not any food anywhere else, and so Joseph's brothers came down to get food. Big long story there, but at the end of it, he revealed himself to his brothers, and he convinced them to go back and get Israel, Jacob, and bring him back down. So all their family at this time moved to Egypt. So that generation of the 12 sons of Jacob are now in Egypt. So that's how the family got there. So I'm going to start reading now in Exodus 1. And this will remember that Joseph was second in command to the Pharaoh, but like all humans do, they die. And eventually, everything you work yourself up to will not be known anymore. And so, if you work yourself up into a situation at your job or whatever to where you're pretty high and you've got a lot of influence based upon who is your boss, then if that boss leaves or goes somewhere else, retires, whatever, then the person that replaces him doesn't have that same relationship that you had with him. And eventually, they're not going to treat you the same way. And that's how it was here in Egypt. And it'll become clear as I read this. So, Exodus 1, these are the names of the sons of Israel. It gives you a quick historical lesson who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan, and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. All the descendants of Jacob were 70 persons. Joseph was already in Egypt. Then Joseph died, and all his brothers and all that generation. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. So you have this nation that wasn't a nation yet. It was a family. It was a clan of people described here as 70 people, not including the family of Joseph that was already down in Egypt. These people all moved down in there. And again, like every human does, they get old, their health wears out, and they're going to die. So we already had the fact that their dad, Jacob, or now he's called Israel, he has already died, and now all these 12 sons of Israel or of Jacob are now getting to that age where they're all dying. But the family is not getting smaller. The family is getting bigger. God is blessing them. They're being fruitful. They're increasing greatly. They're multiplying. They're becoming a strong nation. And that's going to be very key as we continue here to understand that they're becoming big and strong. They're not a family anymore. They're a nation. They're a nation that is filling the land that they're in, which is Egypt. Verse number 8. Now there arose a new king over Egypt, and this is very key, who did not know Joseph. So again, just parenthetically understand that the previous pharaohs, maybe one or two before, we're not exactly sure, had this strong bond relationship with Joseph. Joseph had that great plan to save the nation. If it wasn't for God speaking through Joseph, probably that whole entire population would have starved to death because of the famine. Joseph had this great relationship, was strong, but now generations are passing, and there arose a king, the Pharaoh, who did not have that relationship with Joseph. And he said to his people, because he recognized that something was not good here. He says, "Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us." So the king, the Pharaoh, has understood now, because he's seeing this family that's becoming a nation, becoming bigger and bigger and bigger and stronger. They're becoming stronger and bigger than his own people here. So you have these two nations that are in conflict with each other. You have Egypt, which is the superpower of the time. So there are different superpowers in the history of mankind. You have Egypt right now. Later on, you would have the other nations that became strong. Eventually, the Greek Empire would occur, which led to the Roman Empire. Not a world history lesson here, but you can understand and see that these are the powers that are moving toward here. So the Roman Empire was at the time when Jesus was on the earth, and so you have leading up to the Gospels, including the Gospels and including all the Old Testament, you have the Roman Empire. So those we don't live in a world power situation now where one nation is this big power and in control over everything. Back then, they were, and so you had Egypt, who was the superpower of the time. You had the Pharaoh, who has recognized that there's the problem because this nation, the people of Israel, are just there's becoming too many of them, and he got scared. He says, "Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land." So they understood that the people of Israel were a workforce that they needed, and they were afraid because these people were becoming stronger. Again, parenthetically, you can see, and you can see this throughout history, that when there is one group that is in control over everybody else, most of the time they conquer them because they take away their ability to feel as if they can do anything. When you had an uprising or a revolt historically, it's because you got a group of people that believed that they could overtake somebody, that they saw something that, or they didn't like what was going on, and they did something about it. So the Pharaoh was trying to get ahead of this and put down this people, these Israelites, even more. So he said, therefore they set the taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Ramses, but they multiplied. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel, so they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves, and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick and all kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. So one thing that that nations do to oppress somebody else is that they put their hand against them by making life harder for them. Egypt was no different here. Egypt was the power. They didn't want anybody else to take over their power. Let me give you an example here, and we've talked about this in a previous study. Do you know why the Romans used the cross as a form of capital punishment? They could have just as easily killed somebody or killed whoever that they wanted to. The cross wasn't just something that happened to Jesus. The cross as a form of capital punishment was something that the Romans used. And the reason that they did this, and they would do this, and why would the Romans do it on the mountaintop? The answer for that is because they could show everybody else what was going on. There was it was a documentary that I saw many years ago. I think it was on the History Channel about the Bible. And the Bible doesn't say this. This was kind of a artistic license, and I'm okay with those things. It makes things a little bit more real. But in this scene that I saw when, and we'll talk about this in just a second, how it connects with that. But when Jesus was born, they went down to Egypt to flee from the wrath of Herod. Well, in this scene, they showed people that were being crucified, and the young boy Jesus saw this. Again, you don't read that in the scriptures, Artistically, it makes sense to me. Again, I don't know if it's historically accurate or not, but artistically, it does make sense, and it proves a point that they used this capital punishment as a form of oppressing people mentally to not do anything that would cause them to be crucified. So they would crucify. The Romans would crucify people outside of the cities, up in a place where everybody could see them, so that once they saw this, that it would get in their mind and say, "Hey, I don't want this same thing to happen to me." So whatever you think that you can do, or whatever you think, however strong you think you are, or however much you want to revolt against us, just know it's not going to work. And what happens to these people, this capital punishment, this crucifixion, most painful part of death, the same thing is going to happen to you if you try this. And so this has been done by nations for centuries. So what the Egyptians were doing here, they were enslaving the people so that they would lose their desire to revolt or to join sides with somebody else. As is said here, so that they wouldn't join their enemies and rise up against them, because they were becoming a strong nation. This is not a weak nation. It is not a weak nation now. We saw this just a little bit politically, geopolitically, in the last 2 weeks, when little old Israel was defending themselves, right? And they're still not, while they may be geographically, land-wise, a small nation, they're a very strong nation. And so God was blessing them. The Egyptians noticed this, and so they did whatever they could to enslave these, both physically and mentally. So when you make life hard on somebody, you enslave them mentally as well as physically, and put them to a point where, like, they don't even remember being free anymore. So ages and ages, and we're talking about 400 years of slavery here that the nation was there. So by the time they're getting ready to leave, and by the time that God's appointed time that Moses is eventually going to come back and lead them out, spoiler alert, most of these people don't even want to leave anymore, because all they ever knew and understood was slavery. And that's how you keep a people group enslaved, is that you take away their desires to be free. You take away their desires to be strong. The only thing that these people were now going to know was, people are forcing us to live. People are forcing us to be enslaved. And it's hard. And that's where the people of Israel were at this time. Well, not only did they do that, but the king of Egypt, in verse number 15 says, "And the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of them whose name was Shiphrah, the other Puah, when you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, you shall live." But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this and let the male children live?" The midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because of the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwives come to them." So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, "Everyone that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live." So if you can't oppress them physically, and they're still growing and they're still getting larger, the next thing that you do is you take away their ability to get larger. And so the Pharaoh decided, we're going to kill every male. We're not only going to take away their ability to procreate, because if you take away the males, biologically, you can't have any more Israelites, right? We're going to let the females live, because the females could then procreate with Egyptians and eventually make more Egyptians. But if pure Israelites, people from Israel, the Hebrews, were there, males, they could procreate and make the nation even larger. And so he has this idea that I'm going to have the midwives, when they start birthing, we're going to do away with them. We're going to have a genocide of just a certain group of people. So when you hear historically about genocides, most often heard and talked about, you hear what Hitler did to the Jews in up into and including World War II. And that time, that's not the only time you have a mass genocide. It's very interesting to me. I mentioned a story about Jesus when his family took him down to Egypt. To me, it is the same story. Let me read right quick the account in Matthew's gospel about that same thing that happened. Now, the funny thing is that they left Israel and went down to Egypt, which was the place where, of course, the Egyptians, hundreds of years before, were trying to kill these same people. We find it fast if I can. I think it's in Matthew chapter 3. My hands are not working correctly, and I apologize for the delay on that. Yes, it says here, and just in summary, let me tell you that when Jesus was born, Herod heard that there was a king being born. In his fear, he was going to do away with all the males, or he tried to do away with Jesus, and his way to ensure that he would be successful in doing away with Jesus was to kill all of the Israel males, a certain age and below. It says here in it's actually in chapter 2 of Matthew's Gospel, verse number 13. And when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, Arise, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him. And he rose up and took the child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, Out of Egypt I called my son. Then Herod, when he saw they had been tricked by the wise men, became furious and sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and all the region who were 2 years and under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. This was fulfilled by what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping in loud lamentation. Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because they are no more. So we have the same kind of thing that Pharaoh was doing to the Israel people here in order to oppress the people. Herod was doing years later, hundreds of years later, to make sure that Jesus himself would not be alive. He was trying to kill everybody 2 and under. And so I think it's very important to connect these things moving forward. And because of what the midwives did, just to wrap up the rest of that chapter, God blessed them with children, and that's very important to know, because eventually this is how Moses was saved. Again, I told you before that Moses is a type of Christ that we see in the Old Testament. He is the mediator between us and God. And so, if it weren't for these midwives who were saving the males, then Moses would not have survived. And so, it's very important to see that. All right, so that's chapter 1 of Exodus. That's the introduction to where it is. Again, we're not introduced to Moses yet, but know that Moses is the author of the first 5 books of the Bible, and all those tie directly into each other and then moving forward into the rest of the history of Israel. It is essential for us as Christians. Just let me remind you, it is essential for us as Christians to know our Judeo background because Christianity itself was born from Judaism. There are some differences in what strict Jewish believe. They don't believe necessarily that Christ is the Messiah. They're still awaiting the Messiah to come. While there are Jews like that, there are Christian Jews who believe in Jesus and believe that he has come and he is coming back. So chapter 1 of Exodus complete. Next time we're going to look at chapter 2, and we're going to be introduced to Moses as a baby and how he was saved, and in his circumstances, how he was able to do things there in chapter 2 that would eventually give him access to Pharaoh later on when God calls him back. So let me pray for us, and we'll hope to see you next time. God, thank you for this time that we've had to study your word. I pray that we always understand where we came from before we get to where we're going. And I thank you for our history that we have in our Christian walk, from the history that we learned from how you protected Israel then. I pray just before we leave, I pray for peace in the world. There's a lot going on, and I pray that you would just bring peace and bring an end to all the suffering and all the pain that people are going through. We give you the honor and the glory and the praise for it all. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.